Hello, I'm Dean Bubley. I'm an industry analyst and advisor covering wireless, telecommunications, and a whole range of other aspects of technology. And I'm going to do a very quick introduction of what I see as the changing state of Wi-Fi in the context of the more global wireless ecosystem. So first of all, I apologize for the oversimplified slide. I know it looks complicated, but I only managed to get 6 dimensions out of a possible sort of 15 or 16 onto a 2-dimensional screen. The point being here, wireless is complicated. There are many technologies, there are many ways of looking at it, whether it's in terms of size, speed, importance, coverage, and a spectrum model as well. And I'm going to be looking at where Wi-Fi fits in today, how that might change in future as we get towards the 25 to 2030 and then onto the what I call the 6G era as well. And so obviously Wi-Fi has had commercially a couple of difficult years, notwithstanding the rest of the telecoms and networking space. But I think in the moment I'm seeing a distinct upswing, both in terms of the health of the sector, but also in terms of some innovation, use cases, and general sort of transformation, I guess, around things like spectrum policy. One other thing that's really coming through to me is the number of service providers that are looking at later versions of Wi-Fi, particularly Wi-Fi 7 now. And there's a good link here with the ever-growing adoption of fiber to the premise, whether it's to home or to MDUs. And I'm seeing increasing numbers of service providers marketing Wi-Fi 7 and its capabilities. So I'm based, as you can probably tell from my accent, in the UK, and EE, for example, which is the same as BT, has been very, very much emphasizing the capabilities of Wi-Fi 7 recently, even going as far as offering a guarantee of 100 megabits minimum in every room in the house, which I think is a very interesting departure from the sort of normal sort of best efforts that we see with most sort of Wi-Fi deployments associated with broadband. So whether it's in North America, Asia, and elsewhere, certainly for higher end packages, Wi-Fi 7 is becoming more important. Spectrum is something that I talk an awful lot about, and 6 gigahertz, I've been following this journey for several years, and really looking at the adoption of 6 gigahertz together with Wi-Fi 6E and then 7. And I've borrowed these slides from the Wi-Fi Alliance, which keeps a score of which countries have what stance on both which sections of the 6 gigahertz band, but also whether they're looking at standard power, low power, and so on, and using things like the AFC automatic frequency coordination mechanism to allow for perhaps outdoor use for fixed wireless access or other ways of sharing spectrum with existing incumbents in that band. And personally, I spend a lot of time talking about spectrum sharing. I think that we're going to see spectrum sharing in various guises become the future of pretty much all forms of wireless, especially 6G, which I expect to be spectrum sharing native, because essentially there's no more clear spectrum, and it's getting ever harder to move incumbent users of spectrum out of the bands, whether that's military, whether that's fixed wireless links, a whole range of satellite and maritime and aviation use cases, and others. And so I think that we're going to see a lot more of this sort of coexistence model. So in some parts of the world, the whole 1200 megahertz of the 6 gig band is available for unlicensed use. In other parts of the world, it's the lower 500 megahertz. And in Europe, there's currently a lot of emphasis on whether they can come up with what they call hybrid sharing, of some way of dividing up the spectrum between both licensed and unlicensed use, maybe indoor versus outdoor, urban versus rural, some form of cross-technology signaling. That's probably going to take a while to play out, but I think it's going to be quite an important indicator of how far and how fast spectrum sharing more generally can go in the future. And there's some parts of the world, like particularly China, which is very much still pushing 6 gigahertz for licensed only use, primarily for 5G and future 6G. One thing that I think is becoming increasingly aware amongst not just users, but thankfully, finally, governments and regulators, is the importance of indoor wireless connectivity. Most broadband policy talks about homes passed, homes connected, whether it's to fiber or other forms of gigabit broadband, but they tend to stop their view at the front door of a house or an office or other building. And yet, actually, obviously, almost all the applications we talk about, whether that's entertainment, whether it's streaming, gaming, education, healthcare, industrial automation, happens in building. Almost all the XR, for example, is indoors. Globally, there's about 250 billion square meters of indoor floor space. So you can multiply by 10 for square feet. About three-quarters of that is residential, and one quarter is, or maybe slightly less than a quarter, is commercial or industrial property. And there's never going to be the ability to provide indoor cellular coverage, particularly with high capacity standalone 5G or future 6G, with dedicated indoor systems. And increasingly, we're creating buildings that are like Faraday cages, where the outdoor to indoor penetration is increasingly poor. So we will need to have some mechanism for indoor wireless connectivity. And the default in a lot of places is going to be Wi-Fi. And so I'm increasingly seeing policymakers as well as vendors look at ways to add on Wi-Fi to the cellular world, whether it's tightly or loosely coupled. But I think that we're going to see growing collaboration. In fact, the Wireless Broadband Association recently put out their vision for the future, which stresses that sort of collaboration and interoperation. And one of the reasons for this is that increasingly applications need to be available indoors by whatever wireless means at all. If you think about the number of times you go to a restaurant where the menu is on a QR code, or whether you need to get a boarding pass or a rail ticket or an event ticket, access to that inside the venue. And increasingly there's an emphasis for venue owners and building owners to make sure that there is good connectivity. And that might be an indoor cellular, but it also increasingly means accessible Wi-Fi, and not one where you have to go via a captive portal and enter your name and a whole bunch of other personal information. So we're going to see a lot more use of sort of automated access, perhaps with things like open roaming or other mechanisms for sort of automatic onboarding to the Wi-Fi in public venues in particular, but also in some enterprise and even residential settings too. And so I think that looking towards the future, we're increasingly going to see Wi-Fi as part of this ubiquitous framework. And one of the things I find very interesting is for the first time, the ITU, International Telecoms Union, has stipulated that 6G, or what it calls IMT 2030, will require ubiquitous connectivity. And whilst there's a lot of emphasis on things like rural usage and aviation and use of satellite and high altitude platforms, that it specifically references indoor connectivity. And as I've just said, that will mean Wi-Fi. So Wi-Fi is going to have to be embraced more by the global wireless community, including by governments and policymakers. And if you look at what's been tried in the past, the slide there is borrowed from Cisco. The 3GPP solutions, which are tightly coupling Wi-Fi to cellular, to be honest, have never really gained traction. So we're going to have a lot more loose federation, interoperability, hybrid devices, control residing in device operating systems, perhaps AI-managed connection managers as well. So I think that as we go through the next few years, I think there's going to be a lot of effort looking at various forms of sort of Wi-Fi federation. This word offload, some people like it, some don't. And I think that whether it's using a SIM authentication on a phone or whether it's using some form of other token or identity parameter, we're going to see a lot more easy access Wi-Fi. I hesitate to use the word seamless, but certainly frictionless, I think, is perhaps a word to think about. And there are various organizations that are doing that, whether it's for sort of indoor use on trains. I've given the example there of Transport for London, which is working with like essentially a tower and infrastructure company to do that. In some cases, there may be payment associated. In other cases, it may be federated between, say, an employer and the local transit agency or the healthcare company, where if you've got credentials for Wi-Fi in one place, it automatically logs you on somewhere else. It could link in with your mobile service or indeed your fixed broadband and home. So you almost like have an out-of-home Wi-Fi experience as well. So I think we're going to see a lot of innovation in that space. And one last slide, and I'm going to wrap up because I'm very short on time here. I think if I think about the next year, I see there's some positives and some things which are overlooked. I think there's more awareness of indoor wireless and the role of Wi-Fi, including for governments actually starting to include things like advanced wireless technologies rather than specifying 5G or 6G. They're becoming a lot more general. I think we're going to carry on seeing CSPs pushing out Wi-Fi 7 and perhaps more of these sort of gigabit to the room rather than gigabit to the front door visions. more guest and federated Wi-Fi. And also another thing I haven't really touched on for the enterprise is there's a growing focus on low and deterministic latency, which is something I think the Wi-Fi industry has undersold itself on until recently. It's something that always amazes me that 5G was always supposed to have ultra low latency. That hasn't been delivered, but in almost all locations, Wi-Fi actually has single-digit millisecond latency. Sometimes not always fantastic under load, but I think that that's now finally being recognized. A couple of things I'd like to see more of. There's still sort of early days for the API and developer platforms for people to get access to Wi-Fi capabilities from the application layer. I think some mobile operators are pretty slow with Passpoint and open roaming, and I think they're going to get end run in some cases by the fixed operators or this other federated models. I'd like to see Wi-Fi have more of a vision for use of shared spectrum. I know there's the philosophical belief in unlicensed, but if you look across the world to what's happening with things like private cellular and things like in the US CBRS band, in Europe the 3.8 to 4.2, I think that there could be enterprise or dedicated flavors of spectrum for Wi-Fi, or perhaps I like a IEEE 802.11 if Wi-Fi Alliance doesn't want to certify it. So I think we should see more there. And the last one I'd like to just end on is we don't see as much vision for Wi-Fi, particularly around R&D and academia. You see lots of places that have a sort of 5G center of excellence or university courses and so forth. I'd like to see a lot more Wi-Fi centric academic projects, work, perhaps national innovation centers and those type of initiatives, and also funding where there is sort of research and development funding available from whether it's from governments or from other bodies. So those are what I would see as the trends in terms of Wi-Fi fitting into the global ecosystem. Running out of time, but there's obviously a lot of other stuff that's going on in the background, whether it's AI, geopolitics, climate change. I'll leave that for another time and perhaps later speakers at this event. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to hand over to the next speaker, who's Jeff Heynen, who's the VP of Broadband Access and Home Networking at Dell'Oro Group. Jeff.
Hey, Dean, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for attending this session and all the subsequent sessions as well. Hopefully you can see my screen now. I just switched over to the sharing mode. So what I want to do, and thank you, Dean, for that really good overview. What I want to do, and my area of focus here at Dell'Oro Group, is really on the quantifying the numbers and the shipments. So a lot of the high-level trends that Dean was just talking about, we go out and discuss with the individual vendors, the component suppliers, and gather the data and the shipment information to really justify a lot of the things that Dean was saying. And what I want to do for my short presentation here is really focus on the one slide that Dean talked about, Wi-Fi 7, and just quantify that, where we stand currently and what our projections are for both residential Wi-Fi routers as well as broadband CPE, cable modems, ONT, fiber to the home, ONT gateways, as well as fixed wireless access CPE, all that have Wi-Fi attached and certain technologies. So you can see here the total volume of Wi-Fi units, whether those happen to be residential Wi-Fi routers, either being sold directly through service providers or sold through retail outlets, is fairly constant on a global basis. Obviously, in 2020, there was a pickup, certainly due to the pandemic, and you can see those numbers there as everybody started working from home. So very much so, they needed either improved Wi-Fi or just Wi-Fi to begin with. And after that, we've seen a bit of a slowdown in terms of unit shipments. There's obviously a constant refresh rate among subscribers as well as service providers. And we're very familiar, of course, with 2023 having shown a slowdown in terms of the back half of the year in terms of some overall shipments as these operators focused on upgrading their access infrastructure, for example. So as we look to the future here, what we're starting to see, and this really goes to what Dean was saying, is just how important and how quickly Wi-Fi 7 is being adopted, both on the consumer side as well as really more so on the service provider side. And what we're seeing right now, interestingly enough, is that the China market is really driving a lot of early Wi-Fi 7 adoption. And that's because they're deploying, those operators there are deploying lower cost units that do not take advantage of the 6 gigahertz band, which isn't available to them in the China market currently for these units. However, it is very critical to these operators to be able to market, as Dean mentioned, to be able to market Wi-Fi 7, even if the full capabilities of Wi-Fi 7 as defined in the specification aren't available. And so those fiber to the room, as well as the fiber to the room for businesses, those applications right now are really driving significant volumes of Wi-Fi 7 units in the China market. And again, those are really 2x2 units that are low cost, really to match the ARPU characteristics of the typical Chinese residential or business subscriber. And of course, the benefit for the ecosystem over time is that the components and everything else associated with the overall bill of materials cost for Wi-Fi 7 units begins to come down. And so the very high prices that we currently see on the retail side for Wi-Fi 7 units will begin to decelerate over time and make it more affordable. Interestingly enough, Wi-Fi 7 units, either mesh units or typical standalone residential routers, right now are actually being driven more through service providers than through retail outlets. And that is, of course, because of the high price. So the sticker shock, as you look online through Amazon or Best Buy or your retail outlet and see that a high-end Wi-Fi 7 mesh system, can put you back anywhere from $500 to $1,200, depending on the vendor. If you want that improved connectivity and improved throughput, chances are you might lease those mesh units through your service provider. So that is just an additional charge. And so many operators are finding that they have become a conduit for Wi-Fi 7 and improved capabilities to their customers simply by being a lower cost offering of those units, basically paying that or leasing that over time. It's a model that U.S. cable operators have employed for a decade and quite successfully. And other operators, especially on the fiber side, who want to guarantee that their customers are getting the throughput that they're paying for, especially as you get to gigabit and multi-gigabit services. If your customer is going to take you to task potentially for not offering what they're paying for, you certainly want to do everything in your power to make that happen. Outside of China, Europe, and North America, again, we're beginning to see the early stages of Wi-Fi 7 deployments. As Dean mentioned, more and more operators are beginning to roll out and market these devices. And we really think that this year, 2025, is the year where Wi-Fi 7 units really take off on a global basis. And then certainly through the end of this decade, they will continue to grow and be the dominant Wi-Fi technology of choice. So begs the question, of course, why do service providers want to accelerate Wi-Fi 7? Well, of course, it goes without saying that it's incredibly fast. You get 30 to 40 gigabits of theoretical capacity. They're using 4096 QAM or modulation. You get up to 320 megahertz of channels. And of course, for them, you get additional carrier class features, which is why you see some of these operators going ahead and deploying Wi-Fi 7 without even having access to the 6 gigahertz band, is because they can still take advantage of some of the software features that are available in the specification, including MLO or multi-link operation, as well as access point coordination. So being able to essentially load balance your traffic across different access points. And of course, some of the features that were introduced with Wi-Fi 6, like target wake time, really help to improve battery life of the growing number of sensors that we all have throughout our homes. And of course, the most important feature, as I mentioned, is these operators certainly want to ensure that whatever service, if they're advertising a gigabit or multi-gigabit service, they want to make sure that they've done everything possible to deliver that consistently to subscribers throughout their homes, not just to the door. And of course, for these operators, the focus here is that Wi-Fi 7 is viewed as the first real carrier class Wi-Fi technology, because of not only taking advantage of the three spectrum bands, but also being able to allocate and use all those spectrum bands in conjunction to improve the bandwidth and throughput throughout a house. So that gives you some flexibility and comfort as an operator, because houses are all built differently with different materials that all have an impact on how well your Wi-Fi technology or Wi-Fi spectrum works throughout the house. And these operators also view Wi-Fi 7 as really a foot in the door, as a way for them to begin offering differentiated services. And this is becoming critically important in markets where broadband penetration rates are essentially reaching saturation, and the competitive environment is becoming more cutthroat. So how do you differentiate when speed alone isn't going to be the differentiator that it once was? So this is why operators are so focused not only on Wi-Fi 7, but also in conjunction with that, the virtualization of their access network. So we see on the cable side, for example, the rollout of DAA, virtual CMTS, virtual BNGs for subscriber management, even some virtualization of fiber OLTs, and all the things that across the board that these technology transitions give the operators, including enhanced telemetry and fault mitigation, services like Wi-Fi motion detection, which is a very interesting one, certainly for things like aging in place, telehealth, those type of applications. Wi-Fi 7 enhances and goes beyond just providing parental controls. Cybersecurity is going to be a critical differentiating service, I believe, for service providers, who want to give their customers peace of mind that all their traffic and interactions on the web are going to be completely secure. And in addition to that, predictive bandwidth allocation, now starting to use machine learning and AI concepts, how customers use their broadband and use their Wi-Fi, and taking advantage of the capabilities on the CPE to deliver bandwidth when necessary, and then also without the customer knowing, doing automatic upgrades and patches, software patches to maintain the performance and uptime of Wi-Fi in the home, not just the network to the door. And lastly, of course, on the CPE side, we're seeing a lot of innovation through RDK and Purple and TIP and other initiatives that open up the CPE and make it far easier for configuration and automatic updates that we haven't seen in the past. So all in all, very exciting times here for the Wi-Fi ecosystem, and I'm certain we're going to hear about those more in subsequent discussions. So thank you all for joining, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.